morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Simply Science. So today we are going to be talking about adaptations. We've already learned a lot about adaptations in the past couple weeks, but now we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we didn't know, or we're going to add to the knowledge that we already found out in the last couple weeks. Hair change. So firstly, we already learned that an adaptation is a change that happens in a population over a long period of time. When a change in the environment happens, animals have three choices. They can either move, they can adapt, or they can die. Hello, darkness. So let's talk about dinosaurs as an example to illustrate adaptations. So many scientists think that dinosaurs were wiped out by a meteor hitting the Earth. Other scientists think it could have been a massive volcano and there was a dust cloud that covered the sun. So when either, or an option we have yet discovered, when these options happened, one of these things happened, the dinosaurs had three choices. They could move, adapt, or die. Unfortunately, the dinosaurs were limited in their options, and let's talk about why. So the first option, dinosaurs can move. Their environment has changed, they need to move. But since the event that the scientists think happened was a full-scale global event, they didn't have the option to move because if anywhere they moved was desecrated, basically. The second option they had was to adapt. Now, we already discussed the fact that adaptations happen over a long period of time. That event was like this. They didn't have a chance to adapt, to change, to reproduce and mutate. They had no chance at all for that. So unfortunately, they couldn't move, they couldn't adapt, so the only option left, they died. So now that we've passed that very sad subject of the dinosaurs' death, hello, darkness, let's talk about the purpose of adaptation. So the whole point of an adaptation is to improve an animal's chances of survival. So let's look at the giraffe, and we've kind of discussed this a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper into the story of the giraffe. So scientists think that giraffes have originated from ancient creatures that kind of look like this. So you can see in this picture that the giraffe has a shorter neck, a little bit shorter legs, kind of a different body type. So what scientists believe is that over time, giraffes needed to reach the leaves higher up in the trees. They needed to have access to the food that was out of their reach. So over time, they reproduced with longer and longer and longer necks. But how did that happen? How did the neck just suddenly go from being short to really long? Let's talk about that. So basically every living thing has DNA, and that's kind of the code inside of us that tells us who we are, what we look like, what color our hair is, and that's every living thing. So we all have this DNA inside of us, and our DNA is made up of things called genes. And our genes, again, are just basically kind of the blueprints to say who we are, what we look like, what our body is made up of, how many fingers we have, stuff like that. But genes can actually mutate, and mutations, probably a word you've heard in like superhero movies, but mutations actually happen all the time in our DNA, animals' DNA, plant DNA. And mutation just kind of means a change, a completely random change. So sometimes this change is for the better, and sometimes this change is not great. So there are good mutations and bad mutations. And a bad mutation, an example of a bad mutation might be that an animal can be born with 2 heads or extra fingers. Basically something that doesn't help them survive, and it might actually even hurt their chances of survival. Unfortunately, a bad mutation usually leads to the earlier death of that specific animal. But on the opposite side of things, if it's a good mutation, it will be passed down through the generations. So what's an example of a good mutation, a positive change? In the past, at some point, and again, this is all theorized by massive groups of scientists, I didn't just make this up, the polar bear was thought to once be brown. And at some point, two polar bears got together and they decided to have a family, and they had a bunch of brown cubs and a mutation which made one of their cubs white. Now, this white cub, even though he or she probably felt like the ugly duckling, the odd one out, actually had an advantage over his or her siblings. Because he or she was white, it could disguise better in its surroundings, so it's protected way better than its siblings from predators. So this little white polar bear, even though it was born with a mutation, it was actually a positive thing. The white polar bear, the little cub, had a way better chance of surviving rather than its siblings. So the white polar bear is probably going to be the one that grows up to be an adult and have a family of its own. When that white polar bear, who was a cub, the mutation, the first one ever, grows up, has his or her own family, then maybe out of 5 cubs, 2 or 3 will be white and a couple will be brown. And again, the cycle continues. The brown bears probably aren't going to have as good of a chance to survive, whereas the white cubs are going to grow up, have their own families, and guess what? Their cubs are going to be mostly white. This can happen over a period of many years. This isn't one generation, everyone's white. It's going to take a long time for the population, the entire population's fur, to change. But basically, that mutation was positive. So the animal that had that awesome mutation passed it on to its ancestors, and so on and so on and so on and so on, until eventually the entire population became white. How cool is that? So there are positive mutations and negative mutations, and if it's a positive mutation, then it becomes an adaptation, something that makes a population change to have a better chance of surviving. And animals have all different kinds of adaptations. Now, this we have discussed in our many videos and worksheets throughout the last couple weeks, but animals have all sorts of adaptations, from defense, like the tortoise who uses his shell to hide in away from predators. We've got the porcupine, again under defense, where if something, another animal wants to attack it, its pines, spikes, prevent that from happening. We've got the skunk who uses that scent to again scare away predators. So those are under the umbrella of defense. There's also a lot of adaptations that aren't necessarily attack defense, but what about animals that can camouflage? So we've got the chameleon who can disguise to its surroundings. We've got the sloth, which we talked about a couple days ago in our video. We've got the tiger, which was also in one of our videos, where you can see in this picture, you wouldn't think it actually is well disguised, but that grass and the tiger basically seamless. It's really hard to actually find the tiger. Even caterpillars and butterflies, especially when they're caterpillars, a lot of them are designed to look like they're part of the leaf or the stem. We have the adaptation of migration. So when we talked about, okay, they can either change or they can move, lots of animal populations decide to move on a yearly basis. So we've got the massive migration of buffalo. We've got geese flying south for the winter. We've got even butterflies migrate thousands of miles every year. There's also adaptations for eating. We talked about the different kinds of birds with the different kinds of beaks, depending on what they eat. If they need sharp, pointy beaks for insects, or do they need long beaks, wide beaks for catching fish? Do they need it for fruit? It all depends on what they eat. Here is a fun fact. Did you guys know that humans actually use adaptations to their advantage? Of course, us humans, we're so inventive and want to take advantage of everything we can, that we actually control certain animal adaptations. So some examples of that are those border collies or sheepdogs that help farmers keep sheep controlled. They actually breed the ones, which means they reproduce the ones that are the most loyal, the smartest, the fastest. They specifically only let those ones have puppies so that the puppies are smarter and faster and work harder. Another way that humans control adaptations is by breeding certain pets. So many people want a lot of different kinds of cats or dogs. Some people want the fluffiest cat. Some people want a cat with blue eyes. Some people want a golden retriever. Some people want a husky. So that is just us controlling their adaptations and only breeding certain traits that we want in our pet. Even though we know that the best kind of breed is the rescue kind, that it's better to actually rescue animals that need a home rather than breed a new animal, because there's so many animals in the world that need homes and we don't need to get new ones. Even another way humans control adaptation is even in the milk that we drink. So dairy cows, where milk comes from, if you guys didn't know, milk comes from cows. Well, not all milk, but lots of milk that we drink. They actually try and breed the cows that have the highest quality milk, the tastiest milk, and the cow that kind of has weird tasting milk, they choose for that one not to reproduce, and they keep the ones whose milk is really delicious. So over time, the population will only have the best, highest quality milk. So humans can actually control the adaptations they want. So the most important thing to remember about adaptations is that they occur naturally. In nature, they happen from a gene mutation, which we can't really control. It just happens, and over a long period of time, a population changes. Remember, if it's a good mutation, that it will be passed on into future generations, and if it's a bad mutation, unfortunately, it won't be passed on because the animal has a lower chance of survival. Even though it takes a long time for any adaptation to, did you guys see Stella? Even though it takes a long time for an adaptation to work its way through an entire population of animals, adaptations are happening all the time. Mutations are happening all the time. We just don't see it because we're kind of living in a small time frame of 100 years, if we're lucky. And those adaptations in populations can happen over thousands of years. So they're always happening. We're just not seeing them on a massive scale because our time on this earth is short and precious. So let's recap. When the environment changes, whether it's some ice age or meteor hitting the earth or a volcano or global warming that's happening right now, animals have three options. They can either move, adapt, or die. And the better we are at adapting, animals and humans, the better chance we have of surviving. So that's kind of our mini lesson today on expanding our knowledge of adaptations and how humans control adaptations and why adaptations even happen. So now that we've done that, we can talk about tomorrow and next week, the next couple weeks actually. So tomorrow you're going to have just a little Edmodo quiz to do the weekly knowledge of adaptations, nothing crazy, just a short quiz. So next week I'm going to be introducing you to a project that we're going to do all about adaptations. And I'll give you a little spoiler. It's inventing our own creature to have certain adaptations for wetlands. You kind of get to create your own wetland creature. It's really exciting, but I'm not going to get too into it now because that's a surprise of next week. I also just want to say that all your teachers miss you guys. We know you're working really hard on your notables and you're keeping it going with math and this new unit. We're wrapping up science and social. But yeah, we just want you to know that we miss you and thank you for working so hard. And if you're not working so hard, I know that you're going to right after you watch this video because you're so inspired. So I will see you on Sunday for a video about our future project. Great work today, everyone, and I will see you maybe once more for our final episode of Simply Science.